Thank you, Mr President. I move the motion standing in my name, namely that this council notes that A, South Australia once led the nation on the decriminalisation of homosexuality after Dr George Duncan was murdered in the River Torrens because he was gay. B, South Australia now lags the nation in this area, as it is the only place in Australia that still enables the so-called gay panic defence for murder. C, the Marshall government made public commitments to introduce legislation to abolishing this provocation defence by the end of 2019. And 2, calls on the Marshall Liberal government to introduce legislation to abolish this provocation defence with urgency. And finally, condemns the continued existence of the so-called gay panic provocation defence for murder. Mr President.
Is seconded. The honourable Franks.
Thank you, Mr President. The hateful gay panic defence for murder in South Australia must finally go. It's now nearly 50 years since Dr George Duncan was thrown in Adelaide's River Torrens simply because he was gay, and he drowned. He was unable to swim. His killers were never brought to justice. We know who they were. We know that not only was he unceremoniously thrown in the river once, but indeed a second time he was thrown back in the river by police again because the TV cameras came too late to film the original dredging of this human being from the River Torrens and wanted the vision for the nightly news. That disgusting act led to some, I believe, very fortunate law reform, where we proudly led the nation and decriminalised homosexuality in this state, the first to do so in Australia. That law reform became law and gained that traction because a man was killed. In South Australia, we now lag behind the rest of the country in keeping the so-called gay panic defence as one of the provocation suites that sees a murder charge diminished to manslaughter. The defence is based on a non-violent homosexual advance being seen as somehow legitimising murder and treating it as lesser than murder. This defence not only exists in South Australia, it is being used in South Australia. In my diary, under these COVID times, my staff had marked my 10 years in this place recently. We haven't had a celebration of that because we'll wait for the pandemic to pass before we can all gather together. But one of the first bills I brought to this place was indeed a bill to abolish the gay panic defence. I did so many times, and twice my bills were the subject of review and recommendations by the Legislative Review Committee of this place. Not once but twice the South Australian Law Reform Institute has looked at this issue. Not once but twice. So we've had already 4 inquiries into abolishing the gay panic defence, and each time, overwhelmingly, the recommendation not only of those reviews in the end, because certainly the first one had some major barriers put in front of it, but not only to abolish the homosexual advancement test, that so-called gay panic defence for murder from our state, but to get on and do it. Before the last election, the Weatherill government met and matched the Marshall opposition in a promise to abolish the gay panic defence. Last year in April, the Attorney-General, on receipt of the second salary report, promised by the end of 2019 to abolish the gay panic defence. This week, with the commemoration of the murder of Dr George Duncan, we saw his memorial down at the River Torrens vandalised. For the first time, I believe, in those many years since members of this parliament actually banded together to erect a monument to our proud place in the road to equality, in our proud place in having decriminalised homosexuality, and in the sadness and disgrace that it was the death of a man down at River Torrens that took us to act. That, I don't call it homophobic, I call it hateful vandalism, is given succour and comfort by the lack of action of this parliament to abolish the gay panic defence. How many more years must we wait? Will it take another murder of a man, such as Andrew Negra, who was murdered by Michael Lindsay, who then used the gay panic defence to seek to have his bashing and stabbing and then putting in a wheelie bin and dumping in a gully of a man somehow diminished as more understandable and as of needing a lesser penalty because he claimed that the victim had made an unwanted sexual advance to him. It is now almost a decade since I introduced that bill, and here we are still twiddling our thumbs and giving comfort and succour to hurtful and hateful anti-homosexual acts in this place, while we put this into the too hard basket. All sides of politics have now committed to removing this awful, outdated and disgraceful defence for what should be seen as a pure offence. We keep being promised change and we are yet to see it. It actually pains me that I've had to move this motion today, but I do so because we need to keep the pressure on, because we've learnt in this place that without that pressure there will be no action when it all seems too hard, when those who historically we've treated as lesser are not listened to, are not given the respect, and not treated as equal. With that, I hope that the Council will see fit to support this motion, and I hope that the government will bring forward legislation not by the end of this year, but by the end of this particular sitting, by the winter. With those words, Mr President, I commend the motion to the Council.
The Honourable Mr Wortley to take the adjournment, please.
I move the debate be adjourned.
Is that seconded? Seconded, thank you. Those for questions say aye, against say no. It's carried. The Honourable Mr Franks, in order today for...
Oh, I'd say the next day sitting, but I'll go for the next Wednesday sitting.
Thank you. Is that seconded? Is that seconded? Thank you. Those in favour say aye, against say no. It's carried.